Let me take you back to a morning in October of 1961. I am 18 years old. The sun has not yet cleared the tree line, and my mother is standing in the doorway of my bedroom holding something in both hands, a small cloth, white, folded into a square. She crosses the room without speaking, sets it on the bed beside me, looks at my face for one long moment, and then she says 4 words I have spent 64 years trying to understand. She says, "Do not be surprised." Then she turns and she walks out, and the door closes behind her, and I am alone on my wedding morning with a folded white cloth and no idea what those 4 words mean. I did not ask her. I should have asked her. I was 18 years old, and I was going to be married in 4 hours, and I thought I knew enough. I thought love was enough. I thought the wanting was enough. I put the cloth in my dress pocket. I walked to my wedding, and I spent the next 11 years learning, in the hardest way a woman can learn, exactly what my mother had been trying to tell me. My name is Anna. I grew up Old Order Amish in Wayne County, Ohio. I am 82 years old. I left the community 51 years ago, and I have kept most of what happened to me in that marriage locked behind a door I did not open for a very long time. What I am about to tell you, I have told almost no one. If you want to hear the things Amish women of my generation carried in silence, please subscribe right now and leave me a comment. Tell me your country. Tell me your age. Tell me if you have ever received a warning you did not understand until it was too late. I read every one. Now let me tell you what my mother was warning me about, because it was not what you might think. The theology of Amish marriage in 1961 was not complicated. The wife submits. The husband leads. The body belongs to the union, and the union belongs to God. What happened inside a marriage bed was not discussed before the wedding, not by mothers, not by aunts, not by the bishop. The silence was not neglect, it was doctrine. Modesty required that certain things remain unnamed until the naming became unavoidable. And so girls in my community walked into their wedding nights, carrying nothing but a vague sense that something would be required of them, and that enduring it was the same as honoring it. I had grown up watching my mother move through her marriage like water around stone. Quiet, constant, always finding the shape of whatever was in her way. I thought that was love. I thought that was what the women in my family did. I did not know that what I was watching was survival. I did not know it had a different name. The morning my mother stood in my doorway, she had been married to my father for 22 years. She knew things I did not. She had carried those things for 2 decades in the particular silence of Amish womanhood, the silence that looks like serenity from the outside and feels like a held breath from the inside. And on my wedding morning, she tried, in the only way she could without breaking the rules of her world, to hand some of that knowledge across the threshold to me. 4 words. Do not be surprised. I thought she meant the wedding, the nerves, the length of the ceremony, the benches, the eyes of 300 people. I tucked her words into the same pocket as the white cloth, and I let the day carry me. I married Jonas that afternoon. Tuesday. Amish weddings were always Tuesday or Thursday after the harvest was in. The ceremony lasted nearly 4 hours on hard wooden benches in my parents' barn, the outspun hymns stretching long and slow, the bishop's sermon winding through scripture I had heard all my life. By the time Jonas and I were finally alone, I had been awake since before 4 in the morning. My feet were swollen inside my good shoes. My neck ached from holding myself still for so long, and underneath all of it, underneath the exhaustion and the joy and the terror, there was the white cloth in my pocket, and my mother's voice saying something I still had not understood. Jonas was 23. He had taken over his father's farm the previous spring, 200 acres of flat Ohio land that smelled of turned earth and coming winter. He was a good man. I want to be careful to say that clearly and first, because what comes next could be misread. Jonas was a good man who had been given no more preparation for marriage than I had. He was kind, and he was devout, and he had no language for what a woman might need, because no one in his world had ever used that language in front of him. He was not cruel. He was not knowing. That is an important distinction, and it took me many years in therapy, long after I had left, to understand the difference between a man who harms and a man who simply does not know. Our first night together was not what I had imagined in whatever vague imagining I had allowed myself. It was brief and it was painful, and Jonas fell asleep quickly after, his breathing settling into the slow rhythm of a man who had resolved something while I lay beside him in the dark with my eyes open, waiting for something to make sense. I was not surprised. My mother had told me not to be. But what I did not understand, what the 4 words had not prepared me for, was that the first night was not the hardest part. The first night was simply the beginning of a silence that would last 11 years. Here is what I mean. In my marriage to Jonas, what happened between us in that bed was never once discussed. Not the next morning, not the next month, not in the first year or the 5th or the 10th. It was a country we visited in the dark and never named in daylight. And because it was never named, it could never be changed. Because it could never be changed, it could never be made right. I want to be specific because I have learned that specificity is the opposite of shame. What I experienced in those 11 years was pain. Not every time, not always badly, but consistently and silently and alone. I had no framework for understanding it. In my community, physical discomfort within marriage was not a problem to be solved. It was a condition to be endured. Endurance equaled faithfulness. Seeking comfort equaled hochmut, pride, the greatest sin in the Amish catalog. And so I endured, and I called it faithfulness. And for a long time, I even believed it was. The other women in my circle, I knew some of what they carried, not from direct conversation, never directly, but from the way a woman at a quilting bee would go quiet when a certain subject got near, from the particular look exchanged between 2 older women when a young bride entered a room for the first time. From the morning my neighbor Ruth set a jar of something golden on my fence post. No note, no explanation, just left it there, and I did not understand it for 3 weeks. And when I finally did understand, I sat down on my kitchen floor and I cried. Not because I was grateful, because I thought of every morning I had already lived through, every night I had already endured, all of it, every single moment of it, completely, entirely, unnecessarily. The solution had been in my kitchen cupboard since the day I moved in. I am telling you this because I want you to understand the architecture of what was done to us. It was not one thing. It was a system built of silences, each silence reinforcing the one beside it, until the silence itself became the structure we lived inside. My mother knew some of what I would face. She could not name it. She gave me 4 words and a white cloth, and I went alone into a life I had not been prepared for. 11 years, 5 children, a husband I loved and could not talk to about the one thing that might have changed everything. What happened over the next 11 Sundays after I finally understood about the jar, after Jonas and I had the most important conversation of our marriage at the kitchen table one winter evening, the lamp between us, his face doing things I had never seen it do before, what unfolded in those weeks, I cannot carry in 20 minutes. There are things this recording cannot hold: the names, the counting, the drawer, the dress I kept for 27 years. 3 years ago, I wrote it all down. The book is called The Sundays. The link is in the description and in the pinned comment. I need to tell you about the moment things began to change. Because there was a moment. There is always a moment. It was January of 1968. Jonas had gone to help his brother with a collapsed fence line, and I was alone in the kitchen with my youngest, who was not yet walking. The older children were at school. The house was quiet in the way farmhouses go quiet in winter. A deep, cold stillness that presses in from every wall. And I was standing at the counter looking at nothing, and I realized I had been standing there for a very long time without moving, and I did not know how long. And something in me understood, without words, without shape, that this was not faithfulness. This was disappearing. I am not dramatic by nature. I grew up in a tradition that considered emotional display to be vanity. But I stood there in my cold kitchen, and I felt the word form inside me like something thawing. Enough, not anger, not yet, just enough. I did not leave immediately. You do not leave immediately, not in 1968, not in an Amish community, not with 5 children and no English education and no money and no legal standing that the outside world would easily recognize. You leave slowly. You leave in increments. You begin by learning the things you were never taught. You find a woman who will answer your questions without shaming you for asking them. You start to read. In secret first, then less secretly, and eventually not secretly at all, because you have decided that whatever comes next cannot be worse than what is already here. I left when my youngest started school. I was 31 years old. The shunning was immediate and total. My mother's letters came back unopened for 2 years. When she finally wrote one that arrived, it was 3 sentences. She said she prayed for me every morning. She said the children were welcome at her table. She said she had always known I was more stubborn than was good for me. That last sentence, I've thought about it for 51 years. I think it was the closest she could come, in the language of her world, to saying she understood. I eventually found a doctor, an Englishwoman in Cleveland, who asked the right questions without blinking at the answers. When I described those years of pain, she looked at me and said quietly, not dramatically, that it had been completely preventable. Those 3 words. I had to sit with them for days before I could feel them all the way through. The rage came later. The grief came with it. And underneath both, something my therapist eventually helped me name. The specific sorrow of having been young and willing and full of love, and having had that love wasted, not by cruelty, but by silence, not by a bad man, but by a whole community of people who believed that what you did not name could not hurt you. It can hurt you. It does hurt you. The unnamed things are very often the things that do the most damage because they have no edges, no borders, no place you can point to and say, here, this is where it lives. This is what it is. I am 82 years old. I have lived longer outside that world than I ever lived inside it. I have rebuilt. I have found new faith, different and quieter, and entirely my own. I have watched my children grow into people I am genuinely proud of, all 5 of them, even the ones who stayed Amish, even the ones who have not spoken to me in years. I carry them all, but I think about that girl on the wedding morning. I think about her often. 18 years old, sitting on the edge of her bed, holding a folded white cloth she did not understand, listening to 4 words she could not yet translate. She was not foolish. She was not weak. She was young, and she was alone, and she was walking into a life that everyone around her had conspired, with great love and complete blindness, to leave her unprepared for. If I could stand in that doorway instead of my mother, I would do what my mother could not. I would sit down beside her. I would use the real words. I would say, "Here is what your body is, and here is what it needs, and here is what you are allowed to want, and here is what you are allowed to refuse." I would say, love is not the same as silence, and faithfulness is not the same as endurance. I would say, the cloth in your hand is not a warning. It is a beginning. Whether it becomes a beginning of something good or something hard depends almost entirely on what you are willing to say out loud. She deserved to know that. Every girl who walked into a wedding in a barn in Wayne County, Ohio, in 1961, deserved to know that. Every woman who has ever been handed a warning she could not read and told simply to endure what came next deserved to know that. If you grew up in a world where your silence was called obedience, I see you. If you were given warnings without words, signs without explanations, cloth without context, I see you. If you spent years enduring something that had a name you were never given, I see you. Your body always mattered. Your comfort always mattered. Your experience inside your own life always mattered. And if no one in your world ever said those words, I am saying them now at 82, because it turns out it is never too late to say the true thing out loud. Leave me a comment. Tell me what this opened in you. Tell me your story if you are ready. And if you want to keep hearing from behind the prayer cap, subscribe to Hannah the Amish Girl. There are so many more truths waiting. The Sundays. What 20 minutes cannot hold? The link is in the description and in the pinned comment. The morning is yours if you decide it is. Until next time, choose your freedoms wisely. They might just save your life.